right now. And if you don't have an opportunity to speak sometime during the meeting, please feel free to always email me and reach out. So we're going to start with introductions in the chat bar, if you please. And that's my only record of who attended this meeting. So if you guys will please put your name and your affiliation, if appropriate, in the chat bar. And I wanted to just say there's been a diminishment in the force. We've lost Dan Mahan, who has retired from Albemarle Greenways. And in August, Liz Belcher is going to be retiring from Roanoke, the Roanoke region. And so we're going to have to figure out something to do for these guys. Champ has stepped down from the Virginia Bicycling Federation, but he's still on the board and still very active with a couple of projects across the state. Any other retirements or changes out there that, if you guys will put them in the chat bar, Lynn is helping me watch that and she'll bring those to my attention as well. Now, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Kelly McClary, who's just going to briefly talk about the purpose of our meeting and then go into the Shenandoah Valley Rail Trail feasibility study.
So welcome everyone. This is our second virtual statewide advisory committee, statewide trails advisory committee. Hopefully the next time we can meet in person, but the last one did go successfully and it looks like we have 46 people right now attending. So that's a great attendance. I hope you all enjoy everything that we have today for you. We have several speakers for you later today as well. And so it is a packed schedule. So I will keep my, my notes brief. I did want to go over today a couple things. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about today. DCR has recently been working on a Shenandoah Rail Trail study, feasibility study. And I wanted to give a couple updates on what we've been doing and when that due date is for the General Assembly. I am also going to, once I'm done with that, Jennifer's going to go over a map that shows the study and shows the rail trail at location. And then she's going to turn it back to me and I'm going to introduce Clyde Crissman, which is the director of DCR, and we will go from there. So from now, at this point in time, I wanted to talk about the Shenandoah Rail Trail study. So DCR has been given the opportunity to work on this study. This study is due, and it was appropriated by the General Assembly last year, and it's due November 1 of this year. And we've been working in collaboration with VDOT and DRPT to work on this study. We've so far, what we've done in the last 6 months or so, we've done 4 listening sessions with stakeholder groups. VDOT has also been working with us, and they have actually contracted with Baker Engineering. And to do the intent for that is to work with Norfolk Southern and to do a study and evaluation of the bridges that are along the rail trail. Let's see what else we've been doing. Local towns have provided potential trailheads associated with the locations along the trail. VDOT is also doing a MetroQuest study that's actually out right now, and it's launched this week. It's available both in English and Spanish for the first time, we believe, ever. And we've also planning on a virtual meeting that will be scheduled for July 21st of this year. So certainly we'll put out an advertisement of that meeting when we get closer. And we also ask that everybody that like to attend that's on this meeting attend. So with that said, I'm going to let Jennifer just go over this map real quick. This is a map of the location of the trail, and then she'll turn it back to me.
Sure. If you guys, this was developed by the Northern Shenandoah Valley Regional Commission. It's a connecting trails map. It shows the corridor here in dark green at the top of the map. And these gray areas are the towns that the corridor passes through. These pinkish areas are the battlefield sites, because this entire trail falls within the Shenandoah Valley National Battlefields historic area. And then this green area here is the National Forest, and you can see all the trail systems through the National Forest. This yellow trail is the Tuscarora Trail that crosses the proposed rail trail in Toms Brook. and it is actually a segment of the Great Eastern Trail that goes from New York to Alabama. So this is the South Fork of the Shenandoah. This is the North Fork of the Shenandoah. The trail passes very close to the North Fork of the Shenandoah in several places. There's a lot of bridges, as Kelly mentioned, but the two rivers branches join in Front Royal where the trail terminates. And of course, there's the potential for access here to the Shenandoah National Park. So lots of possibilities there. And I'll turn it back to Kelly now.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I wanted to recognize today, I believe Tom Smith is with us today. He is our Deputy Director of Operations for the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And without further ado, I wanted to also recognize and introduce Clyde Crissman. He is in his 8th year as Director of DCR. I believe that might be the longest time we've had a director, the same Director of DCR. So thanks, Clyde, and I thank you, and I'd love for you to introduce the next speakers.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning and welcome to all. It's exciting to be here as part of this ongoing discussion about state trails and the advisory committee and the great work you do. It's been an exciting year with a lot of attention from the General Assembly. As we just saw the map there of this exciting potential new project that we're looking at in the Shenandoah Valley, and looking at a lot of the other things that are on the agenda today. So what I want to do is sort of introduce our next 3 speakers, and then I'll ask them to each to follow each other so that I don't have to pop back in here for the sake of time. But first of all, my good friend, Senator Emmett Hanger, who represents the 24th District in the Virginia Senate. For those of you that know Senator Hanger well, I think probably everybody on this call knows Senator Hanger very well because he's been such a huge supporter of not only Virginia state parks, but previous trail efforts, and certainly been behind a lot of legislation and a lot of budget activity that supports all we do. So Senator Hanger, I really do appreciate all that you have done for us over the years and look forward to hearing your remarks. Following Senator Hanger, we're going to have Cassidy Resnick, who is our Deputy Secretary of Commerce and Trade. And Cassidy also was recognized as the governor, as the first director of the Governor's Office of Outdoor Recreation. And so Cassidy's going to be talking to us about some of the exciting things that Secretary of Commerce and Trade has going on and that tie into all of everything that the State Trails Advisory Committee does. And then following Cassidy, we're going to have Ronique Day, who's the Deputy Director of Intermodal Planning and Investment. For those of you that don't know, this office falls under the Secretary of Transportation and is about all things intermodal and planning and investing and making sure that we're spending our transportation dollars to provide truly intermodal connections and activities. So with that, Senator Hanger, if I could please turn to you and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And I forgot to mention in my introduction too, also the chairman of the Outdoor Recreation Caucus. Welcome, Senator Hanger.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Can y'all hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, good, good. This particular program I haven't used a whole lot, so make sure I'm coming through. Well, it's a beautiful morning here in the Valley, and I'm excited to be a part of your agenda today. I won't take long because as I looked over your agenda, you got a lot to talk about, and you know a lot of people there to talk that know a whole lot more than I do about the trails, and certainly, you know, speaking to you all, sometimes I'm asked to speak as an expert, but if I were to talk to the Trails Advisory Group about trails, it'd be like me talking to the Medical Society about proper treatment for appendix. Y'all know a whole lot more than I do about what's going on, but I'm a trail user. I bike, I hike, and I love the outdoors and have been just pleased to be a part of what's been going on for quite some time now in the Commonwealth. As Clyde mentioned, the co-chair of the Outdoor Recreation Caucus, and last year, obviously, we're all a little bit frustrated. We didn't get to do a whole lot as far as meetings, but I'm also co-chair of the Sportsman Caucus. But with the Outdoor Recreation Caucus, Delegate Bulova and I co-chair of that. And we also have been active with the Chesapeake Bay Commission And our last Chesapeake Bay Commission meeting, I brought up the subject of us getting out somewhere and do some planning and do that in conjunction with a meeting of the Outdoor Recreation Caucus, perhaps at one of our state parks, maybe even out on the Eastern Shore. I'm not sure where we'll go, but that's where I'm kind of pushing it to go out to Kip-to-Peak or somewhere in that area. The conversation that you had just now about the trail in Shenandoah has a lot of avid supporters. It actually was started by a group of mayors of the small towns. It's kind of unique in that we have all these small towns that have town councils and mayors up and down the valley. And the mayor of Woodstock was instrumental. The mayor of Broadway. In fact, they got a hold of me a couple of weeks ago. We spent a day on the trail riding along with a group of people that are involved and met with several of the mayors, planners, and people that are very excited about bringing this project to fruition. I've also just last week had a conversation with Norfolk Southern, and I'm hoping that we can negotiate something. I think we probably missed a good opportunity when the negotiation was going on with the big dollar amounts for the extension of passenger service, and we did put some money on trails this past year. I was excited that we actually were thinking big there for a while. When coming out of the Senate, we had $40 million that we were channeling to trails. I knew that was not realistic, but we ended up with 10 million, which that is extremely good. And hopefully you all can make recommendations on how to put that to best use as we move forward. I do hope we did take advantage of the opportunity for the Shenandoah Trail. It will be an economic engine, really, I think, for some of the small towns up and down the valley. And there's a lot of excitement towards that project. So hopefully we can push that along. VDOT is cooperating very well, as was mentioned. Right now, we asked the Secretary of Transportation to help us out on that, and so she kind of cut them loose to be involved. But I really hope that you all and others can push this project through so that I can ride that trail from Broadway to Front Royal while I can still ride a bicycle. So we'll just have to work on that. As Clyde mentioned, I've been involved in a lot of things in the Senate over the years, and I'm known for my work with the Finance Committee, of course, and on healthcare. But I like to do the fun things, and certainly I think development of the state parks is a fun thing. So Clyde has done an excellent job. I know he's got his plate full right now, he and his staff, with all of the things we've dished up for them. And I, for one, am hoping that they're going to be queuing up for development the new park up in Loudoun County this year, so that we can consider possibly funding a phase of that. I'm hoping that as this trail in Shenandoah is developed, it will tie in nicely because of proximity as it touches around there with Seven Bends, the new one. For those of you who haven't been there yet, it is just a wonderful place. It was a wonderful place. The good Lord made it a wonderful place, but now thanks to the effort of DCR and VDOT, we have access to it, and picnic tables and lots of fun things that you can do there. So with that, unless y'all have questions for me, I will pass on to Cassie, because she, of course, is in a key spot there to know what's going on to help us push some of these exciting projects. Thank you all for the invitation.
Thanks, Senator Hanger, and what a great advocate for the outdoors that we have, and predated the Outdoor Recreation Office for sure. But it's so wonderful to have such tremendous bipartisan support for the outdoors in the General Assembly, and folks that really kind of get it. You can tell that that lots of folks can speak eloquently about the outdoors, but when folks really live and breathe it, it's really obvious. So thanks for having me. I haven't spoken to you all before, so I'm pleased to be here. I'm going to give y'all a little bit of a sort of introduction to the Office of Outdoor Recreation, and be happy to kind of answer any questions and stick around for the rest of the day. Jennifer, can you flip to the next slide? So state offices of outdoor recreation is a little bit of a trend. It started mostly in Western states. Utah created the first office in 2013. And since then, the industry has been, lobbying for offices, for states to create offices throughout the country. Virginia announced our office 2 summers ago now. I barely count the lost summer of last year, but 2 summers ago now, the governor and I introduced the office in Botetourt County, where I grew up, and got to spend some time with some business and industry officials there. So you can see we've got some competitors on the East Coast. North Carolina beat us by a couple years. And just for you folks that are looking closely at this map, this is a outside industry association map that I have made them correct to add the Eastern Shore into Virginia. So I'll have to update that slide. You can flip to the next one, Jennifer. Thanks. So I probably don't have to do this part of the speech with you guys. Everybody sort of understands why outdoor recreation is such an important part of Virginia. But the things that we're really focused on, and the reason I pitched this office to be created, is really thinking about the economic impact. The rest of my job is Deputy Secretary of Commerce and Trade, so obviously we're thinking about Virginia's economy. The governor is from rural Virginia, as am I, and really making sure that that economic growth is spread throughout the Commonwealth is a real priority for our administration. Outdoor recreation obviously really does impact all places in the Commonwealth, and one of our unique advantages, I think, in the outdoor recreation space is that it, we have every experience, whether you want to go boating, you want to go hiking, you can be in the Appalachian Mountains or the Atlantic Ocean, in the same state, the same Commonwealth, and many of our other states that I've been getting to know, Utah doesn't have either of those. They've got mountains, but not too much in the way of ocean. So it's really one of the things that we speak a lot about when we're promoting our tourism recruitment efforts, is that you can really have any type of experience here in Virginia in the outdoors. Obviously, it's a huge industry. The outdoor recreation industry nationally is bigger than the pharmaceutical industry. Just to kind of give you guys a bit of scale, there are many, millions of direct tax dollars and investment dollars in local communities, and also hundreds of thousands of people that work in this industry. So a really big driver for the nation, and growing, as you guys have, I'm sure, seen over the last year. The other thing I just wanted to mention on that is some of our biggest drivers in economic development now are workforce. That's really a critical decision factor for when companies are choosing where to go. And not only do we promote that when we are recruiting companies that are interested in outdoors and are directly impacted into the industry, but more and more folks in the workforce are demanding that quality of life and sense of place that outdoor recreation really helps to contribute to. So we're, when we're recruiting a company, we not only say we've got this great workforce, but we're able to retain this great workforce and provide them these outdoor recreation assets so they really want to stay in your communities. Virginia's already got a really vibrant outdoor recreation economy. We've got 200 outdoor focused companies already, and we're working to recruit more every day. You can flip to the next one. So this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about outdoor recreation. A couple of the early questions I got are like, what about NASCAR? Well, that is recreation and outdoors. It's not really outdoor recreation. So this is when we're talking about economic impact in our key industries that we're focused on recruiting for business attraction or expansion purposes. These are really the ones that we're talking about. And next slide, Jennifer. Thanks. This is one of the first things we did is really look at all of those industries and compare them with our regional assets. This is kind of one of the things we do. We target specific industries. These three that we've highlighted here are the ones that had the most lined up the most with the assets and interest of each of our regions. So these are the ones that we've really focused on recruitment for the first couple of years, and we've got some exciting things to share in the coming months. We've got a couple of really great prospects we're hoping to announce before the year is up. You can flip to the next one. So what does the office do? I think this is a more interesting conversation for you guys. What we don't do is be everything to everyone in the outdoors. You guys know that. We've got such great partners at our sister agencies in the Natural Resource Secretariat, in my agencies that we work with in Commerce and Trade, that our office is really focused on three things. So business recruitment and expansion is really a top priority for us, highlighting the outdoor industry as a focus for our recruitment and expansion efforts. A lot of that is going out and talking to businesses. We've had hundreds of meetings with potential clients, which is really exciting, and talking to them about why Virginia is a great place for business. As y'all know, these outdoor companies, people don't start an outdoor company because it's a good business. They start it because they love the outdoors generally. And so also promoting Virginia as really that destination and a brand for outdoor lovers. We've got a lot of really wonderful tourism attractions in Virginia. People kind of globally think of Virginia and they think of history, which isn't bad. We've got, we got a lot of history. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, but we do have a lot of it. But really shifting to also promote our outdoor assets as a driver for tourism is another important piece of this. And we've done, our tourism agency has done some surveying of our local destination marketing organizations, and they, 94% are focused on promoting outdoors as their kind of big priority for the next 5 years. So we feel like that's really in line with what we're trying to do here. And then the other piece is coordinating the agencies' work with the industry. When Clyde and his team are out there working to bring, a kayak outfitter to one of the parks, I want them to not only be able to talk about the park and the great assets they have, but also why Virginia is a great state for business. And when DWR is planning the governor's fishing tournament, they're talking to people like Cabela's and Dick's, and so they really need to have the whole story, and just making sure that we are all telling the full picture of why Virginia is a great place for outdoor recreation, not only for kind of having fun and using those assets, but also doing business here is something that we're doing. Obviously that we've been a little distracted the last year, and we're starting to get back together as those kind of four key agencies, DCR, DWR, Virginia Tourism, and BDP, are the folks that are sort of in our core working group, but obviously this work expands out to many other agencies as well. Next slide. Thanks. This, we've also done a little bit of trip planning. This is something that the governor has really connected to. He's an outdoor guy. He grew up on the water on the Eastern Shore, and I think really likes to get outside of the bubble. So we have put him on a speedboat, a kayak, horseback. You can see him there on Spearhead Trails in the corner on the ATVs. On the bike, he's doing the High Bridge Trail, and so he really enjoys this. We're scheduling a river rafting trip right now, and so it's great to have somebody that really authentically connects with this mission when we are trying to highlight our outdoor recreation efforts and make sure that we're really promoting that Virginia not only wants to attract outdoor recreation business, but that it's part of who we are. So you can flip the next one. And this is just a little preview. Obviously, we keep most of our marketing materials as secret as we can, but wanted to show you guys just a little bit. This is a proposal, the top of a proposal that we sent to an outdoor recreation company that we're working to recruit here for business attraction. So this is, just a little bit of the flavor of our spin on what it's like to be the best state for business, but also have that real interest in outdoor manufacturing as well. I think that might be the last slide. One thing I'll just kind of highlight for you guys, we do have a little bit of additional information. We put together a video that really kind of gives the full pitch on why we think Virginia is a great state for outdoor recreation manufacturing. You can see that on the governor's website. It's governor.virginia.gov. /outdoor. So that's got a little bit about our outdoor recreation economy, that the video that's really great on sort of highlighting both the outdoor assets in our business climate and environment. For the rest of our time here, we're really focused on continuing that business attraction and recruitment. Like I said, the COVID has changed a lot for everybody, but our pipeline is still really strong as far as new businesses coming into Virginia and expansions as well. I'm sure many of you all are hearing about your outdoor assets being loved to death over the last year or so. And so many of those outfitters are thinking about expansions, and we're thinking about ways we can help them do that here in Virginia. We also really want to think about how we can connect the regions. One of the things that I've learned from some of the other states that have outdoor offices is they have really robust regional associations. So I think that's really something Virginia could use. You know, we have such great assets by region, but I think a lot of folks that are in the outdoor industry don't quite know each other yet. The governor did a series of roundtables with outdoor recreation-based companies last fall or pre-COVID fall. And we were introducing a lot of people to each other. We were going to state parks and bringing businesses from around the area that hadn't quite met each other yet. And so I think developing that regional infrastructure. So if you are, you know, a guide, you can also get to know the local outfitters in your area. One of the things that we know in tourism is that people they travel for one experience, but they're not just going to do Spearhead in St. Paul and then leave. They come, they eat at the restaurants, they might want to float the Clinch. You know, there really is that connection where we should be thinking about this as a trip and as an experience instead of as a single sort of interaction that you market one company or one experience and then the day's over. So we're working to start doing some regional outreach this summer to really help develop that regional infrastructure. And then as we move past that, I think there's a lot of really interesting things going on around the state that some of our, you know, the people that work here on the James and Richmond don't necessarily know the people that that use the river in Roanoke or Indianville. And so I think getting those folks to be able to get together and share information is going to be an important part of what we do, as well as business recruitment and tourism promotion for the rest of our term. I think that's it for me. I'm happy to pass it over to my colleague, Ronique Day.
Good morning. I hope everyone can hear me. I think that's the thing we say the most these days. So hopefully you can hear me okay. My name is Ronique Day. I am the Deputy Director of the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. We're a small office nestled underneath the Secretary of Transportation. One of the key things that we work on is the statewide transportation plan, VTRAN. So some of you may be familiar with that. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about some of the budget items that came out of this year's session. The first one is the $10 million that's been allocated towards multi-use trails. As of now, there have not been any decisions as yet made by the board on the use of these funds. Here, you know, it identifies that the funds need to be used towards developing new regional trails, improving connectivity, and also ensuring that there is geographic diversity in the use of those funds. Jennifer, can you advance to the next slide, please? And I know there's a lot of words here on this slide, but basically the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment will be pulling together a policy working group over the next several months to start looking at how we can prioritize our trails, as well as a master planning process, in addition to a funding needs assessment. Those members of that policy group will be comprised of DRPT, DCR, the House Appropriations Committee staff, Senate Finance staff, as well as STAG, members from this committee. And then over several months, we'll work on what do we want to identify as criteria to prioritize our trails. We know that, at the height of COVID last year, many were looking at trails as a respite. I can say myself, we've spent time out on trails and biking. And certainly, I think because of COVID, there's been a lot more heightened awareness around the use of trails. In addition, people also think of trails as recreation. But besides recreation, it is and can be an alternate mode of transportation. So as we pull this policy group together, the focus is to outline a prioritization process and have that in place for recommendations that will be made. We do have a report that's due to both the chairs of House and the Senate Finance, and that is due October 15th of this year. So we will also be taking any recommendations to the Commonwealth Transportation Board for decision making, since the allocation of the 10 million is given to them for their use. And with that, I know that's a very high level. Again, we are in the very, very early stages of identifying members to participate on this policy work group. And certainly I am happy to provide any updates, but also want to make sure that everyone knows that you can reach out to me, after this. If there are any questions, please feel free. I will leave my email address in the chat box. And as we develop this group and pull everything together, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions or reach out to you individually by email, or certainly feel free to give me a call. And with that, thank you. I think, Jennifer, we are going into Q&A.
Jennifer, I think you're muted.
You're unmuted, Jennifer.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Just wanted to thank our speakers for carving out some time today to share with us, because I know how busy you all are. And I do appreciate all the work you are doing to advance outdoor recreation and trails in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have a few minutes for questions, so I'm just going to ask Lynn, you've been monitoring the chat bar. Are there some questions for our panel that we should bring forward at this time?
The first question was already answered in the chat box, and that was about whether or not horses would be allowed on the Shenandoah Trail. I don't know if anybody wants to answer that more fully. I know that that was part of the planning process. And then the second question is, in the analysis that was being done by the Outdoor Recreation Office, was there an inclusion of boating, canoeing, kayaking, that kind of thing? I do know that it was mentioned that water sports in general were mentioned, but the question came up about those specific uses.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I'll take that. So yeah, we do consider water sports. That's kayaking, rafting, canoeing, surfing, scuba diving, sailing, stand-up paddling, and all different types of boating as outdoor recreation. That's one of our target industries, is water sports. That really, actually, water sports product manufacturing is consistent with all of our regions. So that is definitely one of our focuses for business attraction. Thanks.
Jennifer, and specific to the question on horses on the Shenandoah, obviously it's a little premature as we're just really looking more so the feasibility, but I can just say this, that I think of that trail to be, in terms of the New River Trail or the High Bridge Trail, both of which have horseback riding available. So I would think that that would be certainly a use that would absolutely be considered as part of that study.
The next question that has come up is, are state parks receptive to new state parks? So I'm not sure if that's Cassidy or someone else, or Hanger, whoever would like to address that.
Yeah, I think Clyde probably is going to take that one.
Well, so I will tell you this. We have language in the Appropriation Act that restricts our ability to acquire property for new state parks without the specific authorization of the General Assembly. I'm not sure if Senator Hanger is still with us, but I will say this: the General Assembly has been very supportive of new state parks as opportunities have come along. I think just they want to be obviously involved in making sure that they know what the financial commitments. But as Senator Hanger mentioned, for those of you that don't know, we just opened our 40th state park, Manchacomico, just a few weeks ago. We're getting ready to open our 41st state park, which will be Clinch River, coming up sometime probably within a month. And then, as Senator Hanger mentioned, we have the Sweet Run property up in Loudoun County, and we are currently in the process of accepting a gift from the county from additional acreage there that will then trigger us into the master planning for that park. The other park, new park that we do have in the wings is the Mayo River State Park down in Henry County. This is a land bank park that we've acquired several years ago, but most recently we've been able to add some significant acreage to that park. And so again, we're going to be kicking in the master planning process to that. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the General Assembly to determine, the ability for us to acquire additional lands for new parks and funding support for that. So, Senator Hanger, I don't know if you might want to add anything to that.
Well, the only thing I would add right now is, and this is something that's been an issue for years, is that there's an appetite for new state parks, and I certainly want to develop additional ones in natural areas and maybe recreation areas like Seven Bends, if we can't put in a full-blown state park with all the amenities. But what we have not been able to do is to keep up with the funding for operations and maintenance. So where I'm at right now, I hope we can make a strong push to kind of re-benchmark our level of support for the state parks in terms of operation and maintenance. And once we have that commitment, then I think we definitely should be building out. And as you again mentioned, the one up in Loudoun County, I'm hoping we can go ahead with that one in the near future.
Yeah, so there are a number of other questions, some which Ronique has already addressed, but there's some more questions about trails and use of trails and how the decisions are going to be made on that. And then also, did the CTB award any funding for the Smart Trail for the Eastern Shore? And then a conversation about other outdoor recreation offices being involved in what we're doing. So Ronique, I guess those are kind of questions maybe best for you to overall kind of cobble them together, and then we can move on.
I just want to break in because John Belechek has answered one question in terms of no smart scale funding for the Eastern Shore Trail. And he's put a link to a PDF there for more information if anybody's looking in the chat bar.
Thank you for that. And I believe I heard a couple of other questions, and I'm sorry if I missed them, but we are working with our federal representatives, our congressional representatives, looking for additional funds to support trails. So there hopefully will be more to come on that. I believe I saw that question. John has answered the question specific to smart scale. Jennifer, did I miss anything else? And if I did, and we run out of time, please feel free to give me a call or email. I did stick my email address in the chat box.
I would say the only other one is a question about utility easements on trails, and if there's a general policy about or recommended best practices about how to deal with that in terms of trail corridors.
I actually would defer to John Belechek on that question. I'm not sure if he's.
Yeah, sorry, my computer's closed up. I don't know if the mic is working well, but can y'all hear me okay?
We hear you.
We can hear you.
Yeah, VDOT doesn't have anything specific on utility easements and how they interact with trails, but this has been an issue that's come up over and over. And I mean, in terms of the fall line, a large portion of that is going to be running straight down utility easement. So, there's plenty of examples where that's been overcome if you need examples.
I think that's pretty much it, Jennifer.
Okay.
I would just say that For everyone that's listening, we hope that you will sign in and tell us who you are, because we're using that as a way of keeping track of everyone. And if there's specific questions that we feel that aren't being answered as we do follow up, we'll be able to address those as well.
Thank you, Lynn. I did want to mention this picture is taken from Fisher Hill Battlefield, and the proposed rail trail for the Shenandoah Valley goes right by this hill. Just giving you an indication of some of the beautiful views that are available from that rail corridor. So we are going to move on. I'm going to ask Kat Anthony, the president of the Virginia Trails Alliance, to give us an update. And she also happens to be the executive director of the Virginia Capital Trail Foundation. Kat?
Thank you, Jennifer. Hope everyone can hear me. Thumbs up, hopefully. And so I love this meeting, Jennifer. I get super amped and excited about trails, and makes you want to continue working really hard. And so thank you. And thank you to everyone here. So VTA, the Virginia Trails Alliance, started about 2 years ago. It's a group of trail groups who are advocating for trails at different levels. And so we met in April to talk about VTA and kind of what's next for us. But this past year has been really fun. So I think the big thing that we are super excited about is that 10 million for trails. And one of the things that we're hopeful for is that funding to continue in some way in the coming years. And thank you, Jennifer, also for getting Ronique to speak about how it's going to be allocated, and which has been a big question that we've had. We've also supported the Outdoor Caucus, which I think with Senator Hanger, and we're really excited to be there and help with that. We've also been working with VCN for white papers previously, and then this coming up year we'll be creating a white paper on trails and then also on access in the outdoors. We also wanted to make sure trails were highlighted in different ways, and so I think there was a few news pieces that was seen. One was on Office of Trails and a couple of other ones, just to kind of continue the hype that trails are very important at the recreation and transportation. We also created a listserv so that people could share trail resources, which has been pretty good. I've gotten a lot of great feedback on that. And then I also wanted to say that I forgot to mention that, yes, I'm the president, but also Peter Krebs is our vice president, and then Sally is also our secretary. And then coming up, things that we're working on is we're also going to be working with VCN again for white papers. Again, I mentioned that trail funding piece is really important to us. We also are working with Volt with dedicated funding sources for land conservation and trails. If you don't know about that, send me an email. I want to make sure the trail community is represented, and our goal is to make sure we advocate for more funding. Other things that we're doing also is, we're trying to invite legislators to our trails. We want to make sure people are out on our trails and know about them. Our next meeting is going to be probably in around October to prep for the General Assembly time. Our goal is to meet about 4 times a year if possible. And really, I want to make sure I'll put in the chat the website and my email, but the big thing I want to encourage all of us is to be active and support one another. The more trails that are built, the better it is for all of us. And then we get that statewide trail system that we all really want. And so I'll put my information in there, but thank you. And I'm looking forward to another year of having fun with trails. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Kat. And thanks again to all of our speakers who are speaking at the state level. And I wanted to give you a chance to leave if you feel like if you've got something else more pressing that you need to do. But of course, you're welcome to stay. We'd love for you to stay for the remainder of this session, which I think is going to be very interesting. We have Karen Whittaker coming up next, and she is the Deputy Executive Director of the League of American Bicyclists. And she has helped out to put together some very informational slides on some of the funding that might be coming available and funding that is available and any changes and tweaks to that funding. So thank you, Karen, for joining us today.
Sure, thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk about next slide. where to go? I want to talk about some funds that are available now, and then some potential funds that have been talked about in terms of the president's American Jobs Plan, but also what Congress is working on, because that's sort of where the rubber hits the road on these. So next slide. First, the RAISE grants are out. These used to be called BUILD grants, and before that they were Tiger grants. So each administration creates their own name. This administration is focusing on sustainability and equity, which is where we get RAISE. And I just want to point out these, biking and walking has been really successful in competing for these, and we expect to be successful with this administration. Philadelphia has funded a trail network, and they've gone back to the well more than once to do other pieces. And we've seen rural trails in Alaska and around the country. Okay, next slide. The other thing is this, that Congress has brought back earmarks. We've seen it in the House, though that process is done, but it's coming to the Senate. There's two types of earmarks. And by earmarks, I mean a member of Congress can say, this is a priority that I want to put some funding towards. There may be a process as Congress works on a transportation bill. We don't know that yet, but there is a process on appropriations, and appropriations is the yearly budget process. So we should expect to see this every year. The Senate has said they're going to do $4 billion total, which is about $40 million for each senator. But recognize that that $40 million could go across all types of projects, not just transportation. So it could be for an education project or a nutrition project, a health project, anything like that. So when you think about that $40 million, if you're interested in doing that, I would look at a project of between $3 and $5 million to be competitive. You are going to want something that has demonstrable local support and that's going to show a tangible benefit, or hope like a groundbreaking or something in the next 4 to 6 years. And if you're interested in that, I would suggest reaching out to the senator's district office and hear what they're looking for. If their first priority may be your third or fourth priority, that may be better than trying to just push for yours. But know that this is some money that's out there, that's new, and it's a good process to learn how to do, because this is the first year, it may continue to exist. Okay, next slide. And right now, whether you're looking for funding through the Department of Transportation or you're thinking about where Congress is right now, these are the buzzwords. These are the key things. So if you can talk about a trail and how it's going to open up access to a community that maybe doesn't have access now, it's going to bring economic development to a low-income community or a community of color, that's the kind of thing that's going to be of real interest. And that's what they're writing the bill towards. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the transportation section in the American Jobs Plan. Next slide. So when we talk about transportation, we're talking about 600 billion. I get it's such a big number. It's hard to remember it's billion. But when we're talking about biking and walking, there's availability for that fund in the roads and bridges section, the road safety, the transformative projects, which is where you get the big chunks of money, as well as in the equity pieces. Next slide. So one of the exciting things about highways, roads, and bridges, and this is also the section of transportation where trails are funded through, is that the president's proposal is talking about repair and modernizing of roads and bridges, but which we usually call fix it first, which is the idea of maintain what you have before you build new. But the idea behind fixing it right is making sure that whatever's there works for all users and helps with safety and resiliency. So even if you're talking about a road network, if the safest way to provide access for people biking and walking is a trail nearby, that's where trails may fit in. Also, in the president's proposal, they're talking about $5 billion of this going to transportation alternatives, which would basically double what Virginia is getting in transportation alternatives. It would be about $26 billion a year. Yep. So on safety, there's also funding for safety of all users, which this is a rough estimate, but I'm guessing about $40 million a year for Virginia for safety of people biking, walking, and rolling. It would also keep the raised grants at that $1 billion a year, which is a doubling of what we've seen the last few years. Next slide. And then on the equity piece, and this is something the Biden administration has been really focused on, there's funding for the idea of if a highway was built within a community that separates sides of that community, they're talking about, can we remove that highway? How do we reconnect those sides? And they talk about it in terms of creating biking and walking access. So another place to think about where trails may fit in. Next slide. So, and just a quick thing on the jobs plan. What it is it's a plan, right? And the goals are sort of to improve what we have, set standards for what they call people-centric infrastructure, and then third, to start doing the research and the development to be better in the future. So that it's a plan, but what it isn't legislative language. It isn't a bill. It doesn't include policy changes. It's mostly just funding, but it's also not all or nothing. So we'll see some of these ideas come through, but we might not see them exactly as the administration wrote it. And also right now it's not bipartisan. So next slide. And you can click again. This has a delayed piece in it. So there, so just, you want to look at the Republican response. Is the circle on your left, the first one that came up. Circle on the right is just what the Biden is proposing. You can see that there's a lot of difference on whether the emphasis is on roads, new construction, versus multimodal, and that light green in the Biden one is electrification. So very different. Next slide. But so every 5 years, Congress has to write a new transportation bill. That's what Congress has been working on now. And that bill includes funding, but it also includes a lot of policy change, where the jobs plan is mostly just funding. What Congress seems to be working towards right now is doing a bipartisan transportation bill with the policy, and then using a process called budget reconciliation that would only be funding. If they do a bipartisan bill, we probably won't see a lot of funding in that second bill. And this process is affecting the general transportation policy in a couple of ways. In one way, the White House is going a lot bigger, a lot more sort of progressive when you're thinking about climate and equity than Congress generally does. So it's sort of giving running room to the Democrats to say to the Republicans, hey, look, we know we're going more progressive than you would like, but we're not going as far as the president. So it gives them that space to move. On the other hand, it's really slowing down the process because Shelley Moore Capito, who's pictured here, she is the lead Republican. She's negotiating both with her Senate counterparts and with the White House. And so it's causing some confusion and it's slowing things down. But the goal is to get a bill this calendar year. Next step. And just looking at what the House is talking about, next slide. And first, it's just looking back at what they did last year or last Congress. So in 2019, the Senate passed a part of the transportation bill, the part that deals with roads and highways. It was bipartisan. It talked about climate for the first time. It added in new money for biking and walking safety. It made some good changes to transportation alternatives. But next slide. So it was a good bill. And then when the House came along, the Democrats and Republicans couldn't come together on climate. So the Democrats wrote the bill that they would want to do. And it was a lot more progressive and included a lot of changes throughout, particularly on safety and creating access across all modes. So next slide. So this year we saw, so last year we saw a really progressive House bill. This year maybe a little bit less progressive because the Democrats don't have as big a margin and there's a lot of pressure to go bipartisan. On the flip side, the Senate has changed from Republican to Democrats, and so their bill may become more progressive. And in the end, we're hoping to get some really good changes for biking and walking. Next slide. So this is just looking at what was in those past bills in terms of funding for biking and walking. So right now, Virginia gets about 23 million a year on transportation alternatives. It's looking, if the two bills stay where they are, you're looking at a really significant increase on that. They're also, both chambers are talking about how to allow the state to have some flexibility to help local governments meet that local match, which we know can really limit development. And Rec Trails is in the mix too. Rec Trails has not seen an increase in funding, I think since 2012. And so that is on the table. Next slide. For safety as well, there was a push in both chambers to address the increase in fatalities and serious injuries for vulnerable road users, people biking, walking, using mobility devices. Both bills would address that and should mean more funding for Virginia to work on that safety. Yeah. And I'm not going to go through this one, but I just want to say there's a lot of emphasis on climate. So if you can make an argument that a trail is going to take cars off the road, there should be some significant new funding to help you do that. Next slide. I also just wanted to talk about a new financing option. It comes through a different committee called Ways and Means. But in the last stimulus bill in 2009, there were these Buy America bonds, which was an infrastructure financing tool to help local governments build infrastructure. In the past, that has not included the ability for a municipality to count a rail banking deal or a deal where they're buying rail from a railroad as part of their collateral. This would allow that. And so this may be a financing tool that could be very helpful to the state or to local governments interested in doing trails. This is in the House side. We're working to get it in the Senate side, but we think that could be helpful. Next slide. And so I can stop there and take some questions.
The first question that I see is a question about the future reauthorization. Do you see any chances of breaking down silos between TA and rec trails, i.e. no distinction between transportation and recreational benefits of trails?
So one of the reasons for that is because the recreational trails community wanted that, because the funding for rec trails is tied to the gas tax from snowmobiles and AVs and things like that. And so their argument is we've been paying in, we should get this money for recreational trails. And that does not work for the larger transportation community. And so that's one of the reasons that those things have been held separately. The transportation alternatives funding can absolutely be used for recreational trails, and we see that happen. And those decisions are made mostly at the state level. And so that, again, becomes the priority of your state.
Thank you very much. I don't really see any other questions in general. Oh, here comes one. Funding share is difficult for small rural communities. Is there anything in any of these federal programs that address rural communities?
Yes. So within transportation alternatives, there's like I said, it gives the state some options for flexibility on the local match. One is that we see some of the larger communities, higher income communities offering, they will offer a larger local match to be competitive. And so what this bill would do is say, as a state, the whole program has to be 80% federal, 20% local. So that if some communities are offering a higher match, the state could choose to allow smaller communities, rural communities, to do a smaller match. The other piece of that is that if a project has a safety benefit, the state could choose to use its highway safety dollars as that local match.
Okay, thank you. And then there's another question about if you have a larger application than the 3 to 4 million you recommended as a sweet spot, is it likely not to receive funding, or is it more likely to receive funding? And I'm guessing that would be more on how the state would then decide to allocate things.
Well, it would be up to the Senate office, and the Senate office is probably looking to help as many areas of the state as it can. So the state office is going to have a total limit of how much they can give. And so if they can do they're going to have a different calculation. Is it better for them to help 4 different communities a little bit? Or is there one project that's going to be big enough and grand enough to help a lot of people? One of the nice things about trails is that they're generally cheaper than road projects, and they can travel through different areas of the state. So you might be able to get, if you can get like 5 or 6 counties or local governments that are supportive of it in one project, then they can sort of say, okay, I've helped this whole group of constituents here and do something. But again, it is up to the state.
Okay. And then this question, in any info on the role of localities or municipal governments in the application of GAOA funds?
I'm not sure what GAOA funds are.
It's the Great American Outdoors Act, and that funding is coming through the National Park Service and other, it's through the Department of Interior, so I don't, Karen is more transportation focused in her work, so.
Yeah, I'm focused mostly on the transportation bill. Sorry about that.
Jennifer, I can chime in if you'd like.
That'd be great, Matt.
Hey, so I'm Matt Helt. I'm the Forest Service representative with the George Washington Jefferson National Forest. The Great American Outdoors Act, there are federal funds, and the Forest Service in particular, we get 15% of the money. So across all the National Forest System lands, that's $285 million, which really, from our perspective, doesn't trickle down to a ton of dollars on each individual unit. However, we're looking forward to some significant projects. I think they're yet to be released, although we are planning on FY21 or implementation for FY21. We're looking forward to hearing back about FY22. And then we're planning for FY23, 24, $25. And the Forest Service has taken a different approach than Interior, the National Park Service has, or BLM. And so we've maybe changed a few things from 21 to where we are going into 23. And I don't know that there's a specific approach for local governments or municipalities to assist in planning per se. However, one of the things we work on pretty holistically is we're trying to come up with a sustainable trail system, and we're still developing that process. But for example, we've been working with Andy Downs in the ATC crew here in Virginia and Eric Giebelstein and the SAWS crew in Virginia to look at AT corridor and wilderness corridor projects. We've been also looking at more developed recreation facilities and trying to put together complete packages that not only benefit the forest, but really benefit the broader local economies. We believe we put forth some really great packages. However, we're just waiting to hear back on the funding with the recognition that of $285 million divided by the entire Forest Service, that's not a lot of dollars to actually get down to the individual units. So I hope that answered your question.
Is there anybody on the call from National Park Service who'd also like to weigh in on that conversation?
Hey, Jennifer, this is Ursula. And I guess just to make a note that the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership, ORLP funding, has been announced. That's $150 million in LWCF money with a special focus on underserved areas and urban populations. And urban is defined by the Census Bureau as populations of 50,000 or more. So I believe there's 25 million appropriated in 2020 and another 125 million for FY 2021.
Thank you, Ursula. Karen, I did have another question for you on the reconnecting communities. We know that highways have split apart communities. We have certainly examples of that here in Richmond, where I am. I believe that also can address communities that have been disconnected by railroad corridors. Is that true?
Yes, I think that would count, and that's an example of the White House bringing a priority that Congress has now picked up on. And the other piece I would say about equity is whether it's the RAISE grants or new reauthorization, there's also a real interest in planning and helping communities who may have an idea that what they're calling is a shovel-worthy project to help it get shovel-ready. So that's the idea of, maybe it's a community that hasn't applied yet, hasn't done the background planning piece. You can get a grant to do that, to be prepared to apply for something next year or in a few years.
Great. Thanks, Karen. I just want to mention Crystal has put into the chat that for the Great American Outdoors Act, for the Land and Water Conservation Fund for the state side, Virginia has over $6 million for FY 2021. And they're preparing for a fall grant round for both acquisition and development projects for localities and municipal governments. And she's put a note here in the chat bar for you guys as well. Crystal, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, we're still in the planning round for that. So be on the lookout. It'll probably be approximately $8 million will be available for the fall. And we are excited that this will be for development projects. In the past, it's been for acquisition. So we're doing a lot of planning, and we look forward to hearing from a lot of people for that funding, 50-50 match.
Well, I really appreciate Karen joining us today. I know we all benefit from hearing what's happening at the federal level, and Karen, I know how busy you are also. So thank you again for a great presentation.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you've got another slide.
These were just extra slides, just summarizing again what to watch for. And then the next slide just says that we should see action in the committees in June, and the House is hoping to pass their version of the transportation bill this summer. And
thank you again. And for anybody, if you guys know of people who were not able to make the call this morning, we are recording this call, and these slides will be available on the town hall along with the minutes when we post those. So we can get this information out to your counterparts. Now we have a panel who are going to share with us some trail user concerns. I want to just mention briefly some of the background of our panelists. Tom Howard is the chair of the Tidewater Trails Alliance. That's a group actively promoting the Birthplace of America Trail, which would extend the Virginia Capitol Trail into Hampton Roads on both sides of the James River. Tom has also been a champion of the Beaches to Bluegrass Trail, better known as the Southampton Roads Trail in his region. Sarah Sanford is the Virginia and North Carolina coordinator for the East Coast Greenway Alliance. She's based in Durham, North Carolina, and she leads the development of the East Coast Greenway in the South Atlantic region. Before coming to the Alliance, Sarah worked in the environmental field as a consultant, naturalist, and environmental educator. Samantha Brown has been working for 24 years with the State of Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Office of Greenways and Trails. In this role, she works with cities, counties, MPOs, and others to develop and implement the Florida Greenways and Trails system. And last but certainly not least, we have Kim Williams. She works with Equinox, a firm that consults in outdoor recreation planning and design in the South Appalachian region. Equinox is currently working in Virginia on 2 trail master plans for the Virginia Creeper Trail and the Mendota Rail Trail. Previously, she worked for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy as a regional planner. So first up, we'll have Tom.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending and listening in on this session. What started this process, I guess for several of us, was the question that came about on the subject of a statewide trail system, and what are the potentials for the state of Virginia if we put together something that was a regional or statewide program, excuse me. So the question got posed of how do we mimic some of the things that our partners are doing to the north of us in Pennsylvania, as well as to the south of us in North Carolina. And with that is how we are setting up this panel for a Q&A session. So I will pass this off and come back to you here in a little bit.
Thank you, Tom. And now we have Sarah Sanford.
Thanks, Jennifer. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Sanford. I'm with the East Coast Greenway Alliance. I'm the Virginia and North Carolina coordinator. I'm based out of our headquarters office in Durham, North Carolina, but I'm from Virginia and spend a lot of my time there still for work. So happy to be here today and thank you for having me. The topic I'm going to be covering is what Tom queued up a little bit. It's the need for some type of state trail designation system in Virginia. So I'm going to touch a little bit on why we might need that and then talk about an example of a state trail system in North Carolina where I also work. Next slide, please, Jennifer. So what you see here is a map of the East Coast Greenway route through Virginia, which is both in development, what we call on-road, and also actual complete greenway sections such as the Virginia Capitol Trail, for example. So our big barrier in Virginia is that, well, I'll start off by saying one of the reasons we feel that we need a state trail designation system in Virginia is because it would help with signage efforts. So one of our big barriers in Virginia is not having permission to install our standard East Coast Greenway wayfinding signs in state right-of-way. And so by state right-of-way, I typically mean VDOT. We don't really go through that much state parkland, so it's not as much DCR, it's more so VDOT. So we do have permission to install our standard signage in the localities, such as cities, towns, some of the counties, which you can see represented there on the map. But not for the state right-of-way. And so when I say our standard East Coast Greenway signs, that is something that we have manufactured in-house. They are about 15 inches high by about 5 inches wide, standard aluminum signs. And we install and maintain them typically. If a locality wants to, they can, but typically it's me out on the side of the road installing signage with some tools. So it's something that we do completely in-house. So there is, when it comes to wayfinding signage, there is an argument that localities should pay for MUTCD compliant signage. So for anyone who doesn't work in the transportation world, MUTCD essentially means U.S. Department of Transportation highway compliant. There's a manual for MUTCD signage with all these technical specs. However, MUTCD signage costs thousands of dollars. It is very expensive. And so for these localities, for these planning districts, their first priority is very rarely to pay thousands of dollars for MUTCD compliant signage. It's a lot, and when a locality is looking at their priorities, it's usually not signing a national trail system, understandably, no offense taken there. So that method is not particularly effective. And so that hence the lack of signage here. And so this is the next thing I say is not something at all to be negative or critical of my home state. It's not any one person's fault, but I will point out that Virginia is the only state along the entire East Coast Greenway from Maine to Florida where we don't have permission to install our wayfinding signs. And that's an issue because wayfinding, as most folks who work on trails here know, wayfinding signage is not just branding. It's not just, oh, look at this trail system. It's quite literally safety. So you need to know where the route is, you need to know where you're going, and you need to know where to turn, and you need to know where not to turn so that you don't get hit by a car. So it's incredibly important to have that wayfinding signage for a variety of reasons. So this is an issue that, again, no one person's fault. It's simply the way our government bureaucracy system is set up. Having worked for state government, I absolutely understand the challenges, but I also understand that it's something we can change and something we can fix. So leading into my next point here, this is something that I think we could change by getting a state trail designation system in place. So Jennifer, if you could go to the next slide. So I'm going to give the example of the state trail designation system in North Carolina, which is also where I work. So you can see this map here is the state trail system. There's 9 currently existing state trails, and these are a wide variety. They're not just bike ped. In fact, even more of them are single track hiking trails. There's paddle trails, all different types. The one folks in Virginia might be most familiar with is the Mountains to Sea Trail, which runs east-west across the state. So the state trail designation system is through North Carolina state parks. And state parks, similar to in Virginia, is under North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. So when a trail gets designated as a state trail, it officially becomes not just a state trail, but a unit of the state park system. So it's not a standalone park the way, for example, Pocahontas State Park is a standalone park, but it's a unit of state parks, so it falls under state government. And the process itself for getting designated and having the state trail system is a legislative process. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Jennifer. This is a bill I'm going to use as an example, partly because this bill is my baby that I've been working on all year, but it's a bill to get the East Coast Greenway designated as a state trail in North Carolina. So this is a process that all the state trails have to go through. You have the legislature introduce and pass a bill that designates your trail as an official state trail. Probably the best part about this is that there is no funding attached to the bill itself. So these types of bills are actually an easy lift for the legislature because trails are a bipartisan issue. It's a feel-good thing where these legislators get credit for creating a new unit of the state park system, and they don't have to appropriate money for it. So this bill, the East Coast Greenway one, passed the House 115-1. We're just waiting for it to go through the Senate, and we have a good feeling that it will pass the Senate, so fingers crossed on that. But I'll just wrap it up by saying, or by answering the question, why do this? Why go through this whole process? So the benefits of having the state trail system in North Carolina are twofold. Part of it's funding. So when you become a state trail, you are eligible for a much wider variety of funding sources through state parks, through North Carolina Department of Conservation and Recreation, and through other sources, because now that we are part of state government, we can apply for funding that we were not eligible for before. The other part is the benefits that come through being part of state parks. So just like in Virginia, North Carolina has state park staff that oversee trail development and construction. They have a state trail coordinator, just like Jennifer. So when we become part of state parks, we get the benefits from those staff members. So they help us with planning, with land acquisition, with construction, with finding funding, with doing feasibility studies. All of their staff essentially becomes partners to us. That is part of their workload, is to help us develop the East Coast Greenway. So in the interest of time, I think I'm actually going to wrap it up there, but just say this process has been incredibly beneficial in North Carolina, and it's something that Virginia could absolutely replicate. Virginia already has an amazing state park system. I would say maybe the best one in the country, not just because I'm from Virginia, but because I really think it is that great. And having the state trails associated in some way, I think would really be a huge benefit. There are other states who have done this too. We'll hear more on that later. But it's absolutely a beneficial process that could help with a lot of the barriers we have with trails in Virginia. So I will wrap it up and pass it on to our next speaker. Speaking of other states, our next speaker is Samantha Brown with the Florida Office of Greenways and Trails.
Good morning still. It's still morning. I am with the Office of Greenways and Trails, and we do several things. One, we're a planning office within the Division of Recreation and Parks. And the division is the entity that manages the state trails. Our office, however, is a planning entity that, the way I describe it is we do everything other than state trails because the division's taking care of those. So we help the local governments. We work with different regions throughout the state to help plan and develop trails throughout the state to connect, have a connected system of state trails. And the distinction would be state trails are managed, but the other ones would be regional trails managed by the local governments, but we're trying to have a connected system. And one of the things that we do, and I am going to be talking about designation, listening to you just a second ago, I'm not sure that the designation is going to mean exactly the same thing, but what we created in statute, it's a designation program. And all of the public lands, whether they be state managed, federally managed, if they want to participate and be a part of the Greenways and Trails system, we can designate them. It's a very easy process. They can, they will tell us what is allowed on the property, what's not allowed on the property. It doesn't cost anything. We sign some documents and they're designated. However, for the private landowners, there was the issue of liability. And so we came up with a way to work with the private landowners who were adjacent to trails, not necessarily state trails, but just any other trails in the system. But if they were adjacent to or within or near, and they would provide access to the trail systems, either the trails or the Greenway corridors, and they designated their land as part of the system, they could get the liability protection that the state has, so that they wouldn't be liable if someone came onto their property. So what I'm going to do right here is just kind of go through the statute and explain in simple terms what that means. So next slide. So again, for private landowners, they do not have to say my land is open and it's a safe place to be. We don't put that burden on them. Basically, they're saying, hey, my property is here. I know that there's a recreational trail or a greenway that people want to get to, and you are more than welcome to come through our property to get there. They cannot charge to get onto their property. So that is the one thing. Or there cannot be a concessionaire that the private landowner profits from. So the one condition is that they don't charge the public to access their land. And typically it is, there's a trail, their land may bisect the trail, so they would have to cross that property, or it's adjacent to it and there's another trail, you know, a mile away, and people can go through their property. We will map that out, and it could be, you know, 1 mile corridor, it could be 500 feet, just as long as they allow the public to come onto the property. Next slide. Again, this is, they cannot charge or can't be any commercial activity. If they receive grants or any tax incentives, like it says here, anything that really helps with the development or management of that designated property, that's not considered revenue. So they're not really benefiting from that. They're putting money into it to help provide that access. So they can get some grants to help develop and maintain that. It also applies to land if they have to if it's adjacent land, then it's access to the land that's designated. So if they have to cross a piece of property, go through the designated property and get to the trail, any land that's adjacent directly to that designated land, they are again protected under the liability statute. They're considered a volunteer of the state, so that's why they get the protection. Next slide. So for signage, what we would do is we would sign, this is the burden of the state, we would put the signs on the property to let the public know that it is designated and you are able to cross this property. But we put it really on the boundaries to let them know it ends here, and please don't go onto the private, property that's not designated. And so we just try to help distinguish that where they are allowed and where they're not. And this, I won't go through all of this, but it basically tells you what, if something happens on the property, this is what, they're protected against any of these. So an injury or damage incurred by a third party arising out of the use. If someone accesses their land through the designated property, if there's any damage in the landowner's property, any of this is protected under that statute. Next slide. Okay. So that's, I quickly went through the statute, but basically it was just a way to, the state does not have to buy the property. So it's not an acquisition of land. It is not an interest in the land. So it's not really an easement. It does not put any burden on that landowner. They can, we enter into a designation agreement, which they will, it's pretty standard. There's a template, but then they also outline what is allowed and what are we allowing the public to do on this piece of property. So they have a management plan summary, basically. And then if they are designated and something happens and they really decide that this is not for them, we can cancel it, so it's basically just an agreement, a handshake agreement, but we formalize it. So it's very easy to get out of if they wish to stop participating. The other thing that it does, and it's not in statute, but some grant programs, and we've mentioned RTP, we have a Florida Communities Trust, the Land and Water. Each of these grant offices have, they've amended their rule so that if a piece of property is designated formally as part of the Greenways and Trails system, they get additional points. So if they apply for grants from any of these offices, they do get extra points if they're part of the system. So they would contact us. We would write a letter supporting that. And so it does help a little bit fiscally for them. But that, in a nutshell, is our designation program. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
I think what we'll do is hold questions until after Kim talks. She's going to share with us a little bit about Tennessee and some other areas, and then we'll have questions for the whole panel at the end. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks, everybody. I'm based out of Asheville, North Carolina, and I work in Southwestern Virginia a lot right now. So I'm going to talk about our experience in other states, but also why we see the need in Virginia. So we worked more recently with the Cumberland Trail, which is part of the Great Eastern Trail. And the Cumberland Trail spans north to south in Tennessee along the Cumberland Plateau. The state back in 1976, a few years after the National Scenic Trails Act, decided to do their own State Trail Act, and it enacted legislation to allow for statewide trails that were supported by their Department of Conservation and Resources. What ended up happening, though, is that a few other trails tried to get through and went defunct. They just couldn't acquire the lands. But the Cumberland Trail was quite successful, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that there were a lot of state and protected lands already along the plateau. So it was stitching those lands together. They currently have a actual park manager, Bobby Fulcher, whose main role is to really help finish the segments and acquire those lands, and they work with several nonprofit trail club groups to do that. And I think the lesson learned from that is really because they are it's a state-supported initiative, they do get a lot more funding. They have signed agreements with Tennessee DOT so that they can streamline any of their crossings, or in some cases going through communities where they're doing current road walks, trying to realign with DOT plans to implement bike facilities or sidewalks or other things within those communities. So the next example I'm going to talk about, if you want to go to the next slide, is Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania currently does not have officially state designated trails. It does have a lot of different national scenic trails or heritage trails, as well as Tennessee. But what Pennsylvania has done is, as part of their state comprehensive recreation plan, they detailed in a much more way in a separate trails strategic plan, what are their state priorities for trails. So not weighing all trails equal, but looking at what are the top trail priorities for the state. So as part of this plan, you can look it up online, the Pennsylvania Land and Water Trails Network Strategic Plan, they've identified the top trails. And if you want to go to, these are some of the action steps as well as part of the priorities for this trail plan. But if you want to go to the next page, it shows the trails plan, and they have prioritized within that trails plan, I think, priority trail gaps. I believe I put that in the next slide if you want to go to the next one. Maybe not, but they have about 10 to 15 different trail gaps, which they are really pouring their resources in. So they have statewide trail coordinators that are helping the local communities, as well as Pennsylvania has a program called Conservation Landscape Initiatives. That's what I used to help with when I worked with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy there. And they have local on-the-ground staff in different regions that are also helping work on these priority trail gaps. So I think it's just one other way to look at how do we streamline all the state agencies and local partners to get statewide trails built. The next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see the need in Virginia right now. So we're wrapping up a plan for the Mendota Trail, which is out of Bristol, Virginia, and it goes 12.5 miles. Shout out to the Mueller, so I believe are one of the brainchilds behind this, and they're on this call. So you have the Mendota Trail, and also we'll be launching the Virginia Creeper Trail Master Plan that looks at the next 20 years of the trail and conservation of the trail landscape. Some of the issues we're seeing is that these are very rural communities where there's less resources as far as financial resource, planning resources, experts who can help. These two trails are in many ways supported by nonprofits. And so I really would reference back to what Sarah talked about. All the NC state resources have applied. I've seen that really successfully done in North Carolina. And they've really helped smaller groups try to get stuff implemented by having the technical resources and helping streamline funding sources. So grant assistance, helping apply for grants, even in some ways, if there's ways for the state to take on some of the burden of grant management. Right-of-way acquisition is a big one. Both of these trails have a secured trail right-of-way, but the larger landscape and the experience of the trail is not protected. So being able to streamline funding for that. And, there's just a lot of other ways, I think, connecting these trails that go across the state as being priority. And so, the thing I didn't mention is that both of these trails are an important piece of the Beaches to Bluegrass statewide trail. And I think if you can get many, many partners aligned with the state and have active working groups and, people meeting quarterly or yearly to really talk about statewide how to get this trail built, I think that would be really helpful for the individual partners. So that's it.
So we've had the opportunity to listen to several viewpoints, and I thank Samantha and Kim, Sarah for bringing some good content to this panel. What we're talking about is creating a statewide repository for information so that the trail systems that you've seen throughout the state, whether they're a route or a facility or a wilderness footpath, there's a central location for somebody to go to and find information, as well as once they're out on the trail, a mechanism to be able to find yourself from point A to point B. State of North Carolina has I'll use as an example, a bicycle route system. Very easy to follow the signs, whether it be bicycle route 2 or 3. Pennsylvania also has a bicycle route system. Theirs are lettered. And, you know, maybe it's time for a system in place so that state trails, whether they're a wilderness footpath or a bicycle route or a facility, that people can locate those amenities, have an opportunity to do some planning, to vacation in the state, as well as make sure that there's a level of comfort so that they can make their plans accordingly. So what we have here is a kind of a unique opportunity, whether it's a state trail system or an active transportation trail system, or whether it's, you know, a component from tourism or economic development, to knit all these together into a single entity so that we have that information source. And with that, I guess the panel is going to open up for some meetings, you know, for some questions here on what your thoughts might be about a state trail system. Is everybody there?
You're muted, Jennifer.
Again, thanks everybody, for all of our panelists for bringing these concerns to our attention. And I just wanted to give everybody in the group an opportunity to weigh in, whether, you know, this is an issue for you, or if there's something you'd like to add to the conversation. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat bar. Lynn, are you still there monitoring the chat bar?
I am, and right now we have one question that talks about if you have a trail connected to a state park, would it be a higher priority? So I think that is kind of a secondary to the general question, but it might be interesting to see if other states that were mentioned, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Florida, if that makes a difference in their planning.
I'll answer for Pennsylvania and Tennessee. This is why they prioritize some of their trails, is it's not only state parks, but state forests or state natural areas. They wanted to prioritize where they already had a lot of land, because they can have a lot of influence. So.
And I was going to say, this is Samantha. We have the Greenways and Trails network, and really the way we developed it was working with each county. The counties would give us their trail data, and then when we mapped it all out, we could see where the connections are. So those would be where the connections are opportunities. But with the priorities, I would say it's hard to answer the question about the state park connecting to a local trail, because we have a list of priorities that we kind of weigh against each other. However, we do have a program that it's called PACT, P-A-C-T, it's Parks and Community Trails. And because we're trying to develop the statewide system, you know, we do know that sometimes there's a state park, and then a mile and a half away, there's a local park or there's a local trail. And so that program is designed to identify where those are, and then to work with the community, because it's not on state property, to work with the community or local government to help identify funding to make that connection. It just makes sense. I mean, so it's kind of answering the question backwards. It's not giving them a priority if it exists. It's prioritizing it because it doesn't exist, I guess. That we try to make that connection so that we have a complete system, if that helps.
I think so.
And
Hey, Jennifer, this is Katie. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I can speak to North Carolina in that there absolutely is a priority on connecting the state parks and the state trails. The best example is the Mountains to Sea Trail, which runs east-west across the state. The big focus with Mountains to Sea Trail is hiking, and they have a lot of through hikers. Similar to the Appalachian Trail, it's just shorter. And so there's actually a huge focus on connecting with the state parks where there's campgrounds, cabins, restrooms, shower facilities, you know, places to go swimming in the summer. So they really, there's a big mutual benefit with having Mountains to Sea Trail as a state trail because it goes through a bunch of different state park lands, and people, those parks see a lot more visitation because of that state trail.
There's other comments in the chat box that have to do with long-term maintenance for the Capitol Trail. How do you sell the need for long-term maintenance, and how DCR would need to get a budget for such resources if DCR was then the housing for the Trails office. It also, there's also a question is, could make sense for staff to recommend such a conference to be funded by the General Assembly. So there was mention about sort of groups coming together and making decisions, and is that something that STAT could ask for money for?
Could I say one thing from Florida? It doesn't cover all of the trails, but we do have an acquisition program. So there's we call it Florida Forever, but money that lands purchased through that program, there, I believe it's 10% is set aside that you can use for upkeep, maintenance, day-to-day management. So that might be one way. That's always an issue for the local governments. But if a state program through Florida Forever does buy property and lease it back to the county, that is a way for them to have a little bit of seed money for the management of that property.
So the county would get 10% of the acquisition cost on an annual basis, or just one time?
It's an annual basis. I mean, each year we call it, very original idea, but we call it management money. That's what the category is called, land management money. And so what we would do is, work with the counties, and for that particular piece of property, there's a formula that's set up, and then they, that money would be available to them for day-to-day or long-term management. If they, for instance, we worked with some counties to purchase pieces of equipment for maintenance, like mowers and blowers and things like that. So the state owns the, that it's state money, so the state would own the property, but for their day-to-day management, they could use that property, and if for any reason they wanted to get rid of it, it would just come back to us for surplus. So it's just an agreement that we have with them.
I can address.
Go ahead.
I can address in Pennsylvania, and I believe North Carolina as well, but Sarah, you let me know if it's different. That it's mostly reliant on the nonprofit and local partners to do maintenance and fundraise for maintenance. The Cumberland Trail in Tennessee, they do have some small amount of funding towards maintenance a year that they contract with their nonprofit partner to do the maintenance, but that partner also is expected to fundraise as well for their own maintenance. And the one other thing I wanted to add is we have had some early conversations with DCR local reps about the idea of the Mendota Trail outside of Bristol eventually becoming a state park or a unit of the state park system. And I think one of the challenging things as far as the model of the state park is that within Virginia state legislature, the way it was written for state parks, as far as I understand, each unit is required to be revenue generating. So that is one of the challenges there, would need to probably be changed legislatively.
And to answer Chris's question more directly about is maintenance covered once they're designated? So the way we do it in North Carolina with our state trail systems is once they're designated as a state trail, if they run through state land, yes, so maintenance is covered by the state in that case. But where they run through city right-of-way, town right-of-way, county right-of-way, if that segment of the trail is owned by the city, county, whoever, it stays owned and maintained by them. So for example, if we had the East Coast Greenway designated as a state trail officially in Virginia, where it goes through the city of Richmond, it would still be the city's.
There is another question here about can the state designate trails on federal lands? And so maybe Jennifer, you could address that because of this, statewide trails, many of them go through federal lands, right?
Yes, and there are two of our state trails, the Appalachian National Scenic Trail and Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail, which are federal trails already, and they sort of have their own designation because of that. So I wouldn't think that we would need necessarily to designate those trails at the state level unless there was some benefit to the federal entities and they, wanted us to pursue that. In terms of our Beaches to Bluegrass Trail, which for instance would pass through the Mount Rogers National Recreation Area, there may be sections of the trail that would not be able to be designated if the federal entities were opposed to that. But the idea is to have some consistent signage and wayfinding, I think, so that the user experience is consistent throughout. So, however we need to work that out, I think there's still, a lot of conversations that need to be held regarding that.
Jennifer, I can chime in as well on that if you'd like.
Yes.
So certainly we would definitely want to be consulted and hopefully we can come to some sort of consensus or agreement on that. I noticed that John mentioned that Guest River Trail is designated as the heart of Appalachia bike route. I don't think we have any signs or recognition of that on any of our maps or websites or certainly the trail itself. At least not that I'm aware of. They might be there. Volunteers might have put them up. But there's often a lot of confusion as well between a designated trail and a route. The Forest Service, we don't designate routes per se, but we do have trails. And certainly if the state of Virginia wanted a trail that went through Forest Service lands, we would absolutely want to be in agreement and probably have some sort of written agreement for that trail itself. And certainly we support, there's been a lot of talk about integration of different, maybe an all lands approach to trails. That's certainly something that we're very interested in. And we're trying to develop the mechanisms to bring that to the public. So Jennifer, we're probably going to be reaching out to you shortly.
Yeah, I think it's recognized nationally as a need for lots of different reasons. Enforcement, where do we allow electric bikes? I mean, there's just the average user is not going to know when they leave county land and enter a federal national forest or leave a state park and enter a local park. And so the land managers have some coordination to do to try to make these experiences seamless.
And Jennifer, I also wanted to lift up what Katie Guerin put in the chat about a policy work group being a really important part of that process. I also agree with what Champ said about recommending a conference to be funded by the General Assembly. But Katie, I think I might have interrupted you earlier. Did you want to expound on what you had put in the chat?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. And no worries. I guess I felt like you know, this conversation just dovetails really well with what Ronique was talking about, and that, you know, we've got this $10 million, and it seems like, even they're still trying to figure it out, it seems like this is kind of the first phase that the state is actually putting some money into this prioritization process. So, you know, she mentioned that someone from this committee would be a part of that policy group, and just making sure that we as a kind of a coalition have a plan for what our voice should be once they kind of establish the guidelines and plan around that.
Thank you, Katie. Lynn, was there anything else that you wanted to bring forward?
Nope, I think we're good.
So I would like to move on to our topics for next meeting. We have a little bit of extra time. I know that the folks working on the 3-notch trail have some interest in rail with trail. And so I wanted to invite Chris Ginsick. I know he's been putting some information in the chat, but also to just bring forward this topic for consideration at our next meeting. Chris.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Gotcha, we hear you. We did hear you. Don't hear you now. Champ, I'm going to invite you while Chris is figuring out his sound issue. You had mentioned something you'd like to be put on the topic for next meeting?
Yeah, possibly. Eastern Shore Rail Trail is making progress, and if anybody's interested, we could probably arrange a briefing on that, so I'll just throw that out.
Okay.
Can I
Yeah,
add
this is Chris. We can do the rails and trail thing at the next meeting.
We hear you talking too, so did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Just we've been real successful this year with local breweries going to contribute % of profits all through June for Trails Month to our local trail nonprofits. So try that in your locality. A good way to crowdsource some money.
I think the Department of Rail and Public Transportation is working on their state rail plan now. And I think one of the things they're looking into now that there's a rail authority is how rail with trail, you know, some policies around that, that they'll, you know, be developing over the next year. So stay tuned. Maybe we could have them present at our next meeting. So if there are no other topics, Lynn, I don't know if you saw anything in the chat that I missed that you might want to bring.
So, but okay. I had an idea about another topic, and that might be, you know, what conversation communities want to have in terms of their contributions to the Virginia Outdoors Plan as we're starting to rev that up.
Yeah, that's a significant, you know, there's going to be a lot of Land and Water Conservation Fund money. And of course, the Virginia Outdoors Plan is funded through the Land and Water Conservation part of the National Park Service. It's the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, or SCORP, if you're familiar with that term. And if you're mentioned in that as a featured project, that gives you extra points on your grant applications. I should mention that we have 2 grant applications live now, which is the Recreational Trails Program and the Trail Access Grants, which are due June 30th. The applications are due, and there's a link there on the slide for you to go access information about both of those grant programs. And also there are some recordings. Crystal has recorded her workshops where she goes in depth on those 2 grant programs. So you're welcome to go find those recordings at that link. And she's also posted that in the chat bar. And Lynn has posted the link to the MetroQuest survey that's out there for the Shenandoah Valley feasibility study. I hope you guys will take a chance to weigh in on that if that's a facility that you might use. We will be having a public meeting for that in July, and we're still working on the feasibility study for that, so that I will be pretty busy with that over the next few months. We also will be preparing a report for the General Assembly for the content from these meetings and the chat bars. And we will be scheduling another STAC meeting probably in early November. So if you have other comments or concerns outside of what we've talked about, always feel free to email me. Jim Lynch has offered to give an update on the Dahlgren Railroad Heritage Trail at our next meeting as well. If there are any other comments or questions, I think we're just about pushing up on our time. We have a few minutes if there's anything else. Thank everybody for joining us today. And I know it's an extremely busy May, so I know thanks again for carving out time for this meeting. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you all for attending today. We really appreciate your input. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm signing off. You guys have a great day.